Okay, found. Right. Okay. So we're just going to take the feet. What I wanted to work on today was sort of the back of the pelvis. So have your blanket, have some padding across the back of your pelvis so that you can really relax here. And the great thing about the blanket that I love is that it just gives you something to sink into. It gives you something that the skin and the tissues on the back of the pelvis can connect with, because it's soft and it's nice, and the body is happy to rest there. And I think really thinking about resting the back of the body. So just taking the feet a little bit wider and turning the toes inwards, and then doing something that we never do usually, and just letting the knees rub in together. You found the squeaker. Just letting the knees drop together. And when we find the big toe and the inside of the heel here, this connects us to the inner sides of the legs, and of course the sort of the groins area in the center of the pelvis. And what we find is that when we really pull down through the big toes and the inside of the heels, that starts to give us a broadness between the sit bones. So can we feel that that smile at the base of the pelvis can just relax a little bit more? If we pull down through the long little toe sides and the outer side of the feet, then we start to feel the outer sides of the hips, and we can draw those down into the ground as well. So we can really use the feet to relax the hips and broaden that kind of, we can find a width on the inside of the pelvis. So if we bring the hands onto the front of the hip bones, more into the hip bones at the front, we're just interested in that soft tummy between the hip bones. Can we let that settle back? You can use the heel of the hand to just roll the hips away towards the heels a little bit, and that might give you a little bit more space between the top of the leg and the sit bone. So we know that we've got some quite dense tissues there, so ligaments and all of those other bits and pieces. So can we really encourage the drawbridge of the coccyx to roll away, but also we've got that broadening width that happens as well. And we might find that things are a little bit stiff or a little bit sticky around the front of the hip, front top of the hip crest or iliac crest. So these are your the big Mickey Mouse ears are called the iliac bones. So sometimes it's nice to just have a little massage there. You can get your fingers in there and just make some nice smoothing movements. Again, this is a place where there's a lot of quite dense ligament tissue here, it's the inguinal ligament, and we can hold a lot of tension here, so it's nice to get in there and just give it a little bit of a massage, but it starts to free up around the hips and it frees up around the tummy, and we start to release tension there. And just noticing as the hands are around the hip bones, just noticing as the hands move around by the hip bones. How have you found every squeaker this morning? Does this allow for softness and length in the feet? You might find that the toes start to spread and soften, that the soles of the feet get a little bit of length to them. And you might find that you start to have those micro adjustments in the spine gets longer. So you're just going to pull down through the right side, outer side of the right heel. And if we pull down through the outer side of the right heel, just noticing that will draw the knee out of the center. And if we keep pulling down through the heel, it will take the knee out. We want to keep the hips just neutral, just laying on the ground exactly as they are, nice and heavy. And then if we just lengthen the long little toe side down into the ground and roll through the balls of the feet and come back to the big toe joint. As the big toe joint pulls down into the ground, the inside of the heel pulls down into the ground, take the knee back to the center again. And we can do this on the left side. We just pull down through the outer side of the left heel. That draws the knee out to the side. And we get that nice movement in the ball and socket joint of the hip. And then long little toe side comes down into the ground. We can roll through the balls of the feet. Big toe joint draws the knee back in, inside of the heel, draws the knee back in, and they come back to the center and we relax completely. So just playing on the right and the left sides. And we want the movement of the hip to be really happening because of the foot. Can we let the hip just be drawn along by the foot? And again, just noticing the adjustments that happen in the hips as these muscles really start to relax and release. And they're given the opportunity. You might find that the feet start to wander off away from you and they have to come back in again. It's just noticing where we've got areas of tension. Noticing which parts of the feet engage easily with the hips, which parts of the feet may be a little bit disconnected from the hip. When the feet aren't connected to the hip, we get this kind of brace messaging going on, which might not be useful in the long term. So it's always good coming back to this.
So, Kaz, sorry, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what happens with the ankle? Like, because I sort of feel like I want to lead with the ankle.
Yeah, so when we're starting to broaden through the feet, okay. So it's a messaging issue when we get stuck into the ankle. Can we so there's quite a lot with this movement, there's quite a lot of inversion and eversion that's happening with the foot when we're doing this movement. So whilst our focus is on, initially is on the knee and how, it's driving the movement in the hip, we want this softness in the ankle as well. Can we focus on that center of the foot? So whilst we're moving, we're looking at sort of inner and outer edges of the heel and the toes. It's actually this real center point of the foot where where we've got all these bone structures. Can we create space there? We've all got animals this morning. So your kind of your fulcrum, if you like, or the movement is coming from this deep center of the foot.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much.
That helps.
Great.
And then what we find is actually, whilst we're working on, because everything's connected, isn't it? Whilst we're working on the center point of the foot, it gives us slide and glide into the retinacular. And then you might find that, there's movement in the shins as well. This is going to free up the tissues all around the knee. We feel it predominantly in the hip. But of course, it's all one big sock, or one big stocking, if you like. So just coming back to center for a second, leave the feet out with the knees dropping in. And then all we're going to do from here is just pulling down with the right big toe and the inside of the heel. And just letting that, because when we pull down with that, it takes us into that laying twist movement. We get quite a big stretch on the front of the right hip. Leave the ribs on the ground, leave the elbows on the ground. Leave the shoulders on the ground. And it's just making this lovely movement. We can get this stretch into here, but when we're coming back to the center, we're just going to pull down through the outside of the heel. Can we leave the pelvis passive to pull us back to the center? And then the big toe joint and the inside of the heel on the left side. And we might find that the sides are different, that we've got more to work with on one side than the other, perhaps. Maybe it's a little more challenging to keep the ribs on the ground or keep the shoulders on the ground. We notice these different things. And again, we can make this as static or as dynamic as you want it to be. If it's nice to have a big stretch through the side of the waist into the side of the ribs, then we can pause here for a moment and just rest and breathe. Let the elbows be heavy, maybe even the backs of the hands if you've got the space. Can we feel like we've got weights in the palms of the hands and weights in the eye of the elbow? It all helps to feel that the collarbones can just slide off the edges of the shoulders. And we don't need to do too much. And we just let the body sort itself out. And when we're coming back to the center, we've got that pull down through the outer side of the foot, but we've got this broadness, softness, heaviness to the back of the pelvis now. It's interesting with these movements, the pelvis just seems to get heavier and heavier and heavier and broader and broader and broader. And that allows a more spacious environment for the breath to just flow in. And it feels like a nice massage for, you know, the glutes and those big muscles on the outer side of the hips. Next time we come back to the center, we're just going to let the knees float in towards you. Leave the pelvis as it is with the sit bones rolling away, with the coccyx rolling away. And we can just bring the hands to somewhere around the knees, but the knees can just, you know, when we move with the natural orientation of the hip, it may be that the knees go slightly towards the edges of the body. So they don't come in towards our tummy and in towards our chest, because that's not really the nature of the hip. It's more sporadic than that. So it naturally just externally rotates and starts to go towards the edge of the waist. So with the weights of the hands on the hips, can we just, on the knees, sorry, can we make the left hand heavy onto that sort of front of the knee, front of the shin type area, and it will start to pull the body over towards the left hip. And then we can do the same with the right hand into the right knee, which will rock us back to the center and over to the right side. And just finding where is right for you. You might find that the knee comes quite far down to the floor, or you might find that it's quite a small movement. But it's nice for that top of glute max, which is again top of the iliac crest there, on the back and lateral side of the hip. And get into the muscles there. Feels like a nice kind of self massage going on. And again, just noticing what's going on up in the ribs as well. We might find that there's a lengthening and a broadening and a spaciousness that starts to happen there. We're just going to come back to the center. just let the elbows, we've still got the hands on the knees, we're just letting the elbows just lift, a little bit like we're flying, or a chicken dance or something like that. But the elbows can just drift out to the sides and sort of drift up towards the top corners of the mat, just noticing what's happening with the shoulder blades there. Shoulder blades will start to descend the back of the body, which draws the jaw in and gives us space into the neck. So with this kind of chicken wing position, should we call it that? Chicken wing asana. It takes the elbows out of the way. So can we just use the left hand on the inside of the left knee just to take us over to the side, just to take the left hip over to the side. But this time we're going to let the right elbow be free. So it's free to drop down into the ground. It's free to connect through the shoulder and take the right ribs down to the ground. And we might find that something like a deeper laying twist starts to happen. We're keeping the sit bones looking towards the end of your mat, looking away from you towards the end of your mat. So notice the pelvis is tucked under because the weight of the legs can do that for you. But we want to keep the legs coming through the hip. So there's still a length, a strength, and an integrity to the deep waist. So we're not just collapsing through the tummy. We're not collapsing through the low spine. We're sending the tail and the sit bones away. So we've got a length to the waist and a strength to the waist. Notice if the right shoulder is coming up around the ears, minors. It may be that the feet are happy to just keep dropping in towards your bottom. Or you might find, depending on how you feel, that the feet start to extend away. But the feet are extending away because they're being pulled away. And that keeps the integrity of the legs and keeps them plugged into the underside of the ribs. We don't want to be hanging them off the back of the pelvis. And if you've got low back issues and sacroiliac weakness here, keep the feet in towards your bottom. You're very interested in sending the sit bones away and engaging those central core muscles. The legs back through the pelvis, if you haven't already, will bring you back to the center, and it's like that rocking movement. We just sort of fall back through gravity because gravity will take you back to the mat, and then we can play through the other side. So again, it's just that, floppy feet. Let the legs go back through the sockets into the ground. Legs are heavy, so they give us, we can use them to our advantage. Right hand on the inside of the right knee. And it's not a pushing, it's just the weight of the hand of the forearm that just encourage a rolling. Can we go in with no expectation from what happened previously on the other side? And we just go into this one without any thought for what might happen. The left elbow. There's a weight in the eye of the elbow. Like one of those pétanque balls or something like that. A good sand-filled ball. That just when we've got that pointy part of the elbow being pulled down and into the ground, it's kind of on the diagonal actually, it's down and away into the ground. The long arm bone can connect back to the spine, and that draws the side of the chest open. The legs look after themselves, whether the feet extend away, whether they don't, doesn't matter. But we're not hanging off the back of the pelvis. If it feels heavy through the back of the pelvis, or it feels like we're hanging off the low spine, just bring the knees back somewhere towards the center line and then just start again. You can go back to the point where you feel the drop of the legs. And then off we go again. . we'll just have a play, just one more on each side. Again, when we come back to the center, really practice this art of letting the limbs fall through the sockets. You can do it arms and legs, but when we really let the limbs fall back through the sockets, you know, the movement is effortless because we can just use body weight and gravity. That's all we need. We get to use so many more muscles are involved in our movement. When we move in this way, it becomes a body-wide event rather than just a certain, you know, a couple of different muscles that we think we're isolating and using. Interesting one when we're coming back to the center, and only because I just did it, but be mindful not to lever yourself back to center through the elbow that's coming into the ground. Can we send the work back into the central core system? It's a tricksy one, but it's one that I notice in my own practice quite often. If I haven't quite got that connection to the gravity, then my brain thinks that I need help. You like, I always need help, but if I need help, then we get this levering that happens, and it's so subtle we can miss it often, but we press our elbow into the ground and create the movement that we want. But can we leave the shoulders, leave the jaw, leave that upper part of the spine just to relax and broaden and let the tummy muscles do the work. So next time we come back to the center, we're just going to let the feet come down into the ground. Let the heels drop. Freeze the toes. Let the toes go nice and long. And again, we're just going to find the outer side of the right heel, just going to pull that down. And you can feel when we pull down ever so slightly through the outer side of the right heel, start to tilt ever so slightly onto the outside of the right hip. Freeze the leg from the hip flexor. Or me and the Christmas tree are going to get too close. So feel that the heel gets pulled away and the leg gets drawn out of the socket, and we get this lovely long leg out of the long waist. And then can we do that on the left side? So we've got this lovely drawing away of the left heel and the left foot and the left leg and the left hip and the left waist. So we get this lovely spaciousness between the rib and the hip. And then a spaciousness between the top of the iliac crest and the top of the thighs. And a spaciousness into the back of the knees. So we feel like the legs are being pulled away. So whilst, you know, we could call this Shavasana for those of us that are yoga inspired then, but it's not splat pose. It's quite active. We feel that the legs get pulled away and the legs are plugging in or still plugged in to the low spine all the way to the underside of the ribs there. We're going to take the elbows into the ground. Let the long arms just come back through their sockets. Feel the shoulder blades. And just let the jaw sink. Let the tongue sink. Let the eyes sink. But a lovely smile. It's quite difficult to do this and teach at the same time, because when the jaw really disconnects. We're talking a lot about jaw stuff. We're going to get into this in the new year. TMJ, or temporomandibular joint, which sounds all very, very posh and complicated, but it's not. Basically, it just means the back part, the bony back part of your lower jaw and sort of underneath your ears, really involved in the fight and flight response and in our stress responses. So can we really feel that the jaw is just can just drop back towards the ears, can just drop back towards the back of the head. The tongue will go with it. Behind the nose will go with it. Behind the eyes will go with it. And as we let this all drop, we become very aware of the connection between the base of the skull and the top of the neck. Can we keep dropping the nose into the back of the head? Can we keep creating space between the base of the skull and the top of the neck? And it feels like the throat gets drawn back, and it feels like the collarbones can relax and release. Everything is assisted by weights in the hands, which gives you space in the palm, weights in the elbows, which gives you space between the forearm and the long arm bone, gives you space into the underarms. So we're just going to make one ear, the right ear, very, very heavy. We're going to let the eyes look over towards that ear. So eyes look to the right side. It's interesting because if you let the eyes just roll towards that right ear or towards that right wall, can you feel that your head is already starting to move? Micro movements, but your head's already starting to go just from the action of the eyes. Can we let, this is going to sound terrible, can you let the right side of your face slide off your face? And the ear gets heavy. And this movement is all to do with base of the skull and the very, very upper parts of the neck. So it's such a tiny movement. And then when we're going to come back to the center, eyes first. And you'll feel that as you refocus the eyes on the ceiling above you, your head is already starting to move. And then can we take the eyes over to the left? The head will follow. The heavy ear. Such a tiny movement. But we want to see what's happening. We want to notice what's happening in the base of the neck. Base of the skull, top of the very, very top of the neck. Notice if the range on one side is more than the other. I'm going to refocus the eyes back to the ceiling. And then this time we're going to take eyes to the right, ear to the right. So when we feel that the ear pulls down into the ground, now we've got more neck involved. As the jaw follows the ear, we've got more neck involved. Can we drop left hand, left shoulder down into the ground? Collarbone is going to, left collarbone is going to slide off the left shoulder. So we need more space in the neck and real upper parts. Same movement to come back to the center. Then can we come through on the other side? Again, just really, we can feel the difference in the two sides, of course we can. Feeling the range in the two sides as well might be slightly different. But if we get stuck, if we run into muscles that feel tight, muscles that don't feel so slidey and glidey on one side as they did on the other, go back to the hand, the weight in the hand, the weight in the centre part of the elbow, the weight in the underarm, and that side of the ribs. And the eyes start the movement to bring us back to the centre. And this time we're just going to employ a little bit more. So we've got eyes going to the right, ear goes to the right, jaw goes to the right. Can we just keep pulling down through the ear? And what we start to find is that the head connections start to wake up all the way through. Now the top of the ribs, down through the thoracic. Just reverse the process to come back to the center and go over to the left, and it's the same thing. How far down do these connections go? And actually they go all the way down to the base of the pelvis. We're going to find out in the next movement. So let the collarbone and the shoulder blade get pulled down into the ground. The opposite side of the ribs pulled down into the ground. And then we're going to refocus on the ceiling, and then this time we're going to go all the way down to the pelvis. So the eyes go right, head goes right. And we let the left foot heel just be pulled down into the ground. Left hip just pull down into the ground. Left waist, left ribs. And trace that all the way down into the back of the pelvis. You might find that you feel the spine getting longer. And the eyes come into the back of the head and refocus on the ceiling to go in the other direction. Got the pull through the right heel and the pull through the right hip. And the right side of the waist. And as we come back to the center, just noticing how we feel. Have we got a head that's now connected to the pelvis? So we can let the right heel sink into the ground and then just come back to the center. And the same with the left foot. And it just brings the knees in towards us, and we're going to give the knees a nice hug and have a little rock from side to side. Just noticing how that feels. This time we're just going to let the hand come down into the inside of the left knee. And just let that take the whole body over onto the hip, over onto the rib, and over just somewhere towards the shoulder. So not actually onto your shoulder, but we get that nice plate of the shoulder blade that can support us. Head starts to go as well. And it's like a point of balance where we can just sort of sit in that hip, rib and shoulder. And then can we take the right arm just through, maybe the arm up towards the sky a little bit so it gives us a bit of weight, arms are heavy. So we can drop that back through the shoulder into the right ribs. And then maybe the right ribs start to come towards the floor. If it's nice to drop the right foot onto the ground and give it a little bit of a rest, then you can. But if it's nice to just keep the long legs coming through the sockets, can we just keep leaving the arm through the socket? And it brings us into our laying twist, but backwards. That makes sense, because the legs are already there. And then can we just soften and breathe through the ribs, through the shoulders. Maybe the right elbow starts to come towards the ground. Maybe the right ear starts to look away from you. In the opposite direction to the legs. But again, we're nice and connected through the center. So that real sort of solar plexus area becomes a function junction for sending the low spine and the sit bones away towards the end of your mat, feet end of the mat, and becomes a function junction for drawing the ribs back to the center of the spine. And then that creates length up through the thoracic vertebrae, up through the neck vertebrae, up into the back of the head again. So we've got the spine that moves in the two directions away from each other. And when we're coming back to center, let the leg, so right leg first, let the right leg drop back through the socket, which starts the movement of the pelvis. And we don't need the levering of the left elbow. Brings us back to the center, and we can go in the opposite direction. So rearrange. You find that, a bit like me, my hips tend to go off on a little wander all of their own. So just bring yourself back into some semblance of head and ribs and pelvis all in a line. And the same thing. So we just hands on the front of the knee, front of the shin. Takes us over onto the right side and just finding that right edge of the hip and the ribs and the shoulder blade. And then we just start that process of just opening. It's like an unfurling, an unwinding, a bit like the bracken. Can we just unfold or unfurl from the center, from the spine outwards? The limb's always looking to unfurl from the spine outwards. We've got sit bones going long, low spine going long. And then each individual vertebrae through the thoracic, as the front of the ribs draw back, just creating space between each ribby vertebrae. And we tend to hold a lot of tension here. The head is heavy, so a lot of the back of the ribs tend to get a little bit caught up, a little bit bunched up. So can we create space? And in doing this, it actually draws the tissues in towards the spine and creates more support and stability. Interesting thing, because a lot of the time we think when we're going long that we're stretching and that would create instability, but when we are lengthening through but letting the limbs really connect to the spine, what we find as the spine lengthens is it has more stability, because, you know, a little bit like the finger trap, it draws all the tissues into the spine bones, into the vertebrae. And then we're just again going to just let the legs, it's the left leg into the hip that's going to draw you back, start the process of coming back to the center. Without levering of the left elbow, the right elbow. And then again, just holding the knees and having a little rock from side to side. And then we're just going to come up, so coming over onto, in your rocking, you'll find a side that feels right to just roll all the way over onto, and then just following the edge of the hip. You know, if we think of these hips as sort of two, it's going to come out wrong, isn't it? Two round, large balls, one on each side. These round, sort of round hip spheres. And we can just roll round that as when we're on our side, and we can just roll round, and it will bring us up to sitting. And again, just keeping that kind of that heaviness of the legs coming back through the sockets when we're in sitting. Can we start to feel the two sides of the hips? Of course, we've still got the balls of the heels. Balls of the heels come down into the ground, which support the two round hips. So as we find the heels, and the round pelvis, this all helps as we pull that down into the ground. We start to really feel these spirals. It gives us this upward lift we've still got the lengthening that's happening. So it's as, I'm trying to think of the language around it. So as the leg comes back through the hip and pulls the hip down into the ground, that gives a nice upward lift to the spine. We've also got the solar plexus dynamic happening, that when we breathe out and the ribs come back towards the spine, that drops the low spine down into the ground. So that's kind of the tail, the sacrum. It's all very heavy, the low spine heavy. And again, we've still got those two, the spine moving in the two directions from the divider, the base of the ribs, top of the lumbars. So if it's nice to have hands somewhere around the knees or somewhere around the floor, we've got the nice heavy palm, only this time they're upside down. But the heavy hand that gets pulled down into the ground, space in the elbow, space in the underarms, which brings the arms, feeds the arms back to the spine. And again, same as the solar plexus dynamic, when the arms come through the shoulders into the divide between the neck and the ribs, we go in two directions. The jaw starts to get drawn back, the well of the throat draws back, space starts to occur. And again, when we've got all this space, it feels long, but when we talk about space, it kind of takes the brain in a direction that this might be, you know, the elongation would take us into a tendency for weakness, but it doesn't, because the tissues get drawn back in to the spine and support it more. So the discs all get supported by this lovely fascial weave finger trap type thing. And what we feel is that the head becomes very light and floaty, the jaw disengages, the shoulders get nice and straight, you know, that connection between the neck and the top of the shoulder. We start to get broadness and softness there. The heart can sit back, or can just rest back. It's great fun. I've been in more dissection labs recently, and I was very privileged to see the heart sitting in the chest, and it's not upright like we've seen in the books. It's actually sitting back and diagonally towards your left shoulder. So if we think of our heart resting back, it's like almost sort of sitting back into its hammock of in the chest, is resting back. Can we let that happen so that we've got this heart that's sort of, you know, hanging out in the chest, but like sitting in the deck chair or sitting in your favorite armchair, something like that. Can we let that rest back? And again, the heart is very strongly attached to the spine. So the more we get this space and this connection to the inside of the spine, the more we feel that, the more it affects our organs and allows our organs to relax. This is good. So make yourself comfortable. Either have a cushion underneath you, or sofa behind you, or wall behind you. Or if you want to come back to laying, if you haven't done enough laying already this morning, if you want to come back to laying, you can do that as well. But just taking a moment as we're sat, or we're very connected to the inside of the spine for a moment. We go behind the nose, behind the root of the tongue, behind the voice box in the throat, behind the collarbones, behind the heart. Space where the diaphragm, the feet of the diaphragm run down the inside of the spine, at the back of the ribs and the low spine. Back of the pelvis, where the intestines and those pelvic organs are still attached there. the more we draw through the inside of the pelvis into the through the pelvis into kind of that sacrum and pelvic bones area, if we can soften back and broaden at the back there, lets the bladder rest back, lets the uterus and the uterine fascia rest back if you still have those, lets the intestines rest back, particularly that lower part of the intestines. So we get back behind the hip flexors. So when we breathe, let the breath come in. Breath is broad. Comes in to the base of the ribs and underneath the shoulder blades. Lets everything go laterally, outwards to the under, out towards the elbows, if you like. And the breath out lets the head sink back to the top of the spine, lets the collarbones feel like they're going to slide off the edge of the shoulders, lets the top of the body float up towards the sky, lets the low body float down towards the ground. Shoulders drop away from the ears, that sort of stuff. And we can breathe. The breath in is expansive, it's light, it's lifting, spacious. Lifts the top of the body off the waist. Breath out lets everything just go back towards the spine, so the spine just goes in two directions. Final breath here. To let your breath return to normal. And just going to give the fingers and toes a wiggle. And just making some rotations with the wrists and the ankles. Just take the legs long. Pull from the heel. Legs don't finish at your hip, legs finish at the underside of the ribs. And let the arms be free. Remember that your arms extend from, from the pelvis, from the waist, from the underside of the ribs. Can we let the arms lengthen if they're going up towards the sky? Maybe have one hand supporting the other hand and then change over the sides. Lengthen along the floor if you're still laying. Again, that space in the throat, space in the shoulders. And we're going to come back to the center, just bringing the knees in. Have a little rock from side to side. Just waking up the body. Coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you if you're laying, and just returning up to sitting in your own time. Take a moment to check in with yourself, notice how you feel. Good. You've worked hard today, so go gently with yourselves. Wandering around inside of your body takes a lot of concentration, so take an easy rest if you need to, and you've got this recording to come back to over the Christmas break. And very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you so much, Kaz.
That's useful.
Thank you, Kaz. Ooh.
That was much needed.